And one thing that I have learned is that recovery is just really different in different parts of the country. Whatever recovery looks like in your areas, find a person, like find somebody that's working on these issues. Get yourself connected somehow with the recovery community. Find a way to interact and getting connected with some people. It takes, I would say, about 10 seconds in the recovery community to meet somebody else and then somebody else and then somebody else. I think that's one of the things that the recovery community does extremely well, is just this really solid network of people.
Stories are powerful.
Welcome to the Rise, Recover, Live podcast, brought to you by The Phoenix. This is a space where people impacted by substance use can come to share their story of strength and resilience, get open and honest, and inspire hope and build community through shared experience.
We'll be talking to people in our community on their own recovery journey and shine a light on the topic of recovery in all its forms. Maybe you'll hear some of your story in theirs.
Let's show the world that together we rise, recover, and live.
All right, real quick, before we get into this episode, we want to inform you of a brief hiatus we are taking.
It is summertime.
Yeah, if Liz's jingle doesn't indicate it for you, we had to take a break. Rest is important, and so we're just going to take some rest.
Yeah, we're just going to take this summer to rejuvenate, to put together some new, really exciting ideas for the podcast. But we are not leaving you high and dry, right, Bryce?
Nope. Meanwhile, we are replaying some of our favorite episodes, which you may have heard or you may have not have heard, but we're going to replay them.
Yeah, and every time I listen to one of the episodes, I hear something different that I didn't hear the first time or that I need to hear in a different way this time. So I hope that you do listen to the replays. And in the meantime, we've got some asks for you.
First off, if you haven't already, like and subscribe to the podcast so you can stay tapped in. Secondly, there's a volunteer interest link in the show notes. If you have any experience with SEO, graphic design, or anything that could help take this podcast to the next level, we want to be able to work with you.
Yeah, the great thing about volunteering is you get to be more involved in the recovery community. You can give back a little to the podcast, get to know us, and also get some experience if you are looking to advance your career in graphic design, SEO, etc.
So enjoy the episode. We love you. We about to go hit the beach. We'll talk soon. Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Rise, Recover, Live, the podcast. We are your hosts, Bryce III.
And Liz McKean.
And I am feeling like I am full of sun today. How are you feeling, Liz? How's your energy?
Yay! Well, I'm thrilled that you're full of sun because I feel like I hog the sun on this podcast as the Tampa person talking to the Detroit person. So I'm so happy that somehow that managed to be shared between us today because you deserve sunshine because you are a light in my life and you deserve a light in your life too.
I'm telling you, it will change the course of a day when you wake up and the sun is peeking inside and it's just like joyful and jubilant. And I am excited to have this conversation today. So who are we having today on the podcast, Liz?
Speaking of rays of sunshine, we have Alison Jones Webb, who is a public health professional and a recovery advocate. And she's going to talk to us today about being an ally to the recovery community and specific, folks in her life. She's actually written a book about it that I'm excited to hear about. And, we've mentioned allies. We've had some allies on the show alongside folks that they've supported, but someone who's really dedicated so much, time and energy and resources and just has really developed this perspective and this work is really exciting to be able to talk to and to hear her perspective. So Alison, welcome. We're so grateful that you're here.
Hello, Alison.
Well, thank you so much. You guys are great. I'm really, really happy to be here. And I thought I would just start off by introducing myself a little bit and tell you how I came to, identify as an ally, which actually is not a phrase that's used all that much in our community. And then we can kind of go from there. I do come from a family where there's a lot of substance use, like most Americans, not in my immediate family, but in all of the generations in my family, in my extended family. And when I was growing up, we didn't really talk about it very much. We had that kind of family where we didn't talk about anything. So I was always curious about this thing that was in the background at extended family gatherings and things that weren't said about some family members, but I never really could figure it out. And then, kind of fast forward into my career in public health, I was asked to do some work in substance use prevention, which is something that I am so passionate about. And as I got involved in that work, I started meeting people in the recovery community. And a couple of things happened there. One was, of course, people in the recovery community tell their stories and they talk about their own family lives and their own experiences. And I started putting pieces together for me and my extended family. And I started doing a lot of reading and started understanding substance use disorder from a whole bunch of different angles, you know, the intergenerational angle and trauma angle and all the stuff that we know now about substance use disorder. So I learned a whole lot, and it started to click in my head about what's probably going on in my family. And the other thing that happened was I got connected with these young people in recovery in Maine who became my friends and who welcomed me into the recovery community in a way that I just had never felt so welcomed before. And when I was there, I felt like I was home. There isn't another way to say it. And so I began to just really respond to that welcoming, and I began to respond to that feeling of being completely at ease in this community. So that was like the really cool part, the part that just kind of continues to like live on, like really in my body and in my being. And then, you know, on the professional side of things, we did, with this group of young people, we went around to communities in Maine and we talked about recovery. So we didn't talk about addiction. We did a little bit of that, but mostly we talked about recovery. They told their stories. They were so totally on fire about their own recovery and about their life that they were living. And they generated that, like, that fire in other people that were listening in the audience. And so here we are in these small communities in Maine and in schools and churches and different environments. And after these presentations, everybody's so excited, and they would come up to me or they would ask publicly, "This is so great. Thank you so much. What can we do to help?" And so there wasn't really an answer to that. You know, we had a couple of, you know, well, maybe you could do this, maybe you could do that, but there wasn't really a solid answer that was based in research, which, you know, if you work in public health, you know that you got to do stuff that's evidence-based. You can't just do what feels good. So that was the impetus for the book, was somebody's got to answer this question. Somebody's got to do this. And so that's the impetus for the book. And then, you know, there was one kind of cool thing that happened while I was with this group of young people. We were doing a presentation. They had their, you know, their public narrative. They introduced themselves so well. And I think at one point I introduced myself. I'm Alison Webb. I work in public health and I work with these guys. That was like the extent of my self-introduction. And after that, one of the guys came up to me and, you know, he said, "You know, Mrs. Webb, that was really lame." Which was true, right? Which was true. And so together, we came up with, "Mrs. Webb, like, you're an ally." And so again, you know, it was like this realization, it was putting a name on something, like, not that it made it any more real, but it put a name on it so we could talk about it. So that's kind of the genesis of of my own, it's my own path, and just realizing that I'm not the only person that has wondered, like, how do we do this? How do we support the recovery community? What does that even mean? And who are we?
Yeah.
So that's how I came to write the book, but mostly how I came to kind of do the work that I do.
There's a ton there. I think one of the things that stood out to me the most was once you started researching these things, it gave you the language. And then once we have the language, it's like, oh, now I see how some of these things apply to me and my experience. And so what was that process for you like, you know, as you were discovering and uncovering this language? Like, what was that process for you like to take that magnifying glass and this new lens to see life through and then kind of reflect on your own experience?
You know, so that's a great question. It was, you know, these little light bulbs that went off along the way really provided some clarity, like, oh, that's what was happening, but also some relief So I'll give you an example. So, one of the things we know is that, so many of my family members have served in the military, my uncles in particular, and grandparents. There's a lot of potential trauma involved there, but also I was listening to this presentation by this guy who talked about the use of drugs in the military and by the military. In some parts of our country's history, the military is providing drugs to soldiers, either to keep them awake or keep them calm or keep them pain-free. You take your pick. And it made me wonder, because there is a strong military participation in my family. It made me wonder, like, wait a second. So, we've always made this assumption that the substance use in that generation of men, it's all men, was because of the trauma that they experienced in war. And maybe that is what it was. But what if there was this added element of drug use while in the military that was either provided by our country or, it was part of the lifestyle of the military then. And it was like, oh my God, like, imagine, like, it was just this moment of like clarity, like, oh my God, imagine if that is what the life was like of my uncles in the military. So there's that, like, whoa. But then also clarifying, like, understanding, okay, if that was your experience when you're in the military and then you come home, you have kids, you get jobs, you do all of these things, and you're still living with that level of exposure to drugs and alcohol and also trauma, like what that does when you raise your kids. And so just kind of thinking that through was, like I said, it provided clarity, but it was also a little bit of a relief, like, oh, okay, now I can understand better the lives that they led.
Yeah.
I don't know if that makes any sense.
It makes
but just
total sense. Yeah.
Again, it's like when you come from a family where nobody talks about anything, you kind of make stuff up, right? And sometimes you're accurate and sometimes not so much. Yeah, it was just like a relief to kind of get some clarity around it. And then also, like, as we all know now, but what we didn't know 15 years ago is that's much more available now to the general public is all this information about brain science and brain chemistry and, how the brain works, how things happen in the brain when one is exposed to substances. Again, just like really helpful in understanding, oh, so that may have been what was going on in their lives. And when I hear stories of people in recovery who talk about these things that happened while they were using that they couldn't understand, why did that happen to me and not to somebody else? Just kind of putting myself in the shoes of my uncles and thinking, God, I wonder what it was like for them. I just wonder what it was like for them. It gave me a lot more empathy for them. And again, hearing people talk about their own experiences and coming from a family where people didn't talk about stuff, it just allowed me to imagine and to have empathy, just have empathy.
Yeah, that's so powerful. That's like such that's just, I mean, when I think of an ally of anybody, of any community, of anybody, that's all that really I think is the requirement, is that empathy. And that's also sometimes the hardest thing, because sympathy, I feel like we can all reach for, just like I feel sorry for this person because this bad thing is happening to them and it's very separate from me. Empathy is like, oh, I get how that happened to you. That could have happened to me had I been there, and I think that's a courageous way to allow yourself to feel, because I feel like often when it comes to substance use disorder, the kind of like the historically, it's like the onus, the fault lies with the person who, is weak and leaned on to hit that easy button and just kept hitting it. And as opposed to, no, there are real things happening, like, not to take away from our own, personal, choice and responsibility, but like, I didn't know that about folks in the military, like being given substances. You hear about it in the athletic community. You hear about it just, somebody goes and gets surgery and is in pain, chronic pain. And like, here's the thing that's just like, take it. And then all of a sudden, like, oh, this addictive substance you're addicted to it now. And it's become, now it's the person's fault. And I think sometimes that's a little bit of an easy button, because it's like, well, you, not me, that could never be me because I'm, because that's a failing on your part. But then we look around and realize that, oh, shoot, this is happening. Maybe this is happening to me, or this is happening to the people I love. And in those moments, it's like the only way that we can survive as a society is to have that empathy, is to be like, oh, it's us, and that this is something that isn't, this person just failed and there's no reason beyond that. There's like so many layers of reasons, which then can be overwhelming. So to have it broken down in that way, that can be like, this happened. This is, one of the main reasons why. And therefore, maybe there's some solutions, and not just solutions of like, let me pull this person out of the river, but like, let's look up river and maybe not so many people have to get pushed in. That's a perspective that you can zoom out and have, I think, maybe when you're in that position of an ally, that someone who's had the experience and is so just, ingrained in it in a different way might not be able to. So our powers combined, like there are solutions. I love that you explained it that way. So thank you. And thank you for having the courage to look at it in that way and then to share it. I think that's incredible.
Well, you're welcome. And I think one of the things that I have found to be, for myself, but also other allies, and which I encourage people to do, is this activity of self-exploration. And so what is your own experience? What is my experience with substances? My own use, my family's use, the people I love, what have you? What are my own attitudes? And actually, there's some pretty hard-won shifts in attitude because of the clear social attitudes we have that discriminate and have just very negative outlooks on people who use drugs and alcohol. So that activity of self-introspection, and it doesn't end, right? It's not like a one-off where it's like you sit and you meditate and you get it and then you move on. It's ongoing. And, one of the things that I find so fascinating is that because our cultural situation continues to change, again, 15 years ago, not like today, our cultural situation in terms of both drug use and addiction, but also recovery, right? I mean, people are talking now. They weren't talking 15 years ago. And so just kind of a continual self-exploration, I think, is really important. And I just have to give this huge shout out, to people in recovery who tell their stories, who have honestly generated an opportunity for empathy, really and truly, because I'm not really sure you can get that reading about it. And I think as a family member, sometimes you're way too, kind of in the weeds about the issues. And so shout out to people in recovery who tell their stories, because it's just so important.
Yeah. And it's such a beautiful thing too. Like storytelling, like I feel like it's an evolution of a relationship with ourselves. So I might share my story today, and it might be the same story that I've shared with the same catalysts and the same, points, but I may relate to it in a different way because of the development that I've had since those things took place, or since the last time that I told it. And when I tell it, I may hear it in a different way, and it allows for me to reframe my experience in relation to where I am now. And then a problem shared is a problem cut in half. So a lot of times I share, and because I share, like I feel that I've created and gained community. And maybe I've gotten some of these things that have been tossing around inside my head out my mouth. And so now they're not as confusing and as messy and as blurry. And then on the end of an ally, it's like you hear that and it's like, oh, like I didn't see it like that. Like I didn't know it was like that. From over here, it just looked like you didn't care about nothing. It just looked like you was just burning the house down. But I didn't know that you were going through these things. So I think the power of story is beautiful, and the power of understanding, those two things hand in hand, where it's like, okay, a story is shared, and then I can take that story, I can be the recipient of that story and use that to cultivate understanding for a person. And that allows for me to see a bigger picture. And then we create community.
Absolutely. Oh, amen on creating community. And you're right. Storytelling is really important in community. And I think it gives people, just speaking from an ally point of view, it gives us a place to go in conversation. When we hear your story, we want to respond either with our story or with questions or comments or what have you. Like we want to keep the conversation going. And you never know where that's going to go.
Mhm.
Usually
Yeah.
it ends up in a good place, but you never know where that's going to go.
Mhm.
Well, I think there's some fear there too. You know, I've had conversations with, you know, a lot of folks, and you know, if it's something you haven't experienced and you're not part of the community, you're not part of the conversation of like how we talk about this now, and you've only seen
Yeah.
it on TV and movies and read about it and had those conversations with your friends or family who maybe also aren't in that, like, you're gonna mess it up. Like, you're gonna say
Mhm.
the wrong thing. You know, you might like call me a word, you know, that maybe some people still use, and like I absolutely don't relate to, and things like that. And I think there's a lot of fear of messing it up, and then the beauty of having these conversations, and I think also the responsibility of both allies and folks that identify in recovery is to have a lot of grace, you know, and allow it to be like, I don't use that word, you know, maybe some people do, but like that's not where I go, and it is okay to ask questions, and it is okay.
Mhm.
And also, if I say I don't want to answer that question, like, it's okay to ask another one, you know, like let's continue this, because that's the only way that it is going to be a true community, and not like this weird divisive, you know, like different sides of the thing. So how's that experience been for you? Like, have you know, put your foot in your mouth a few times, or have you
Oh my God.
God.
You know, who doesn't have a cringeworthy moment, right?
Daily for me. So.
Yeah, no, of course. And, you know, I have learned, you know, you get to a certain point in your life where it's like, I'll apologize for what I say. I'm sorry if, you know, what I'm going to say is doing it the wrong way, but it comes from the right place.
Yeah.
And then just plow forward. But I do think, you know, I have this experience even with people who are close to me who know I'm part of the recovery community as an ally and as an advocate. But they're, you know, they're like, oh, that's cool, Alison, whatever. But they're not, you know, that's not their thing. And I have this experience. I have to remind myself again and again. It's like we do live in so I used to call it a bubble, and somebody talk about cringeworthy moments. And somebody said, it's not a bubble, Alison, it's a cocoon. We have this lovely cocoon we live in. I'm like, okay. We have to remember that we spend a lot of time thinking about recovery, acting on recovery. For me, reading about recovery, listening to podcasts. We spend a lot of time in that headspace, and not very many other people do. And so to acknowledge that when I start talking about recovery and somebody immediately asks me about, oh, well, how about, fentanyl coming across the border in Mexico? It's like, that wasn't my topic.
Yeah.
But, you know, I can take a moment now to address that, like just to remember that this is a really warm, welcoming, marvelous community, but not everybody is aware of what goes on in it. Yeah.
And with that, so like learning, so how you said, you know, I may say some things and they may not sound the best, but like know that they come from a great place, right? And plow forward. But also, I think our community is great for it, where it's like, then after the fact, where it's like, look, okay, so you said this, and really like, we like for this to be said, or, you know, you said it this way, and this is where we're leaning more towards. And then that willingness to come to a higher understanding through each interaction, like, I think is what like allows for that grace that Leah spoke about.
Yeah.
And I think that's what allows for us to continuously create a space that's safe for people to unfold, because that's in alignment with recovery in general. Like, it's a continuous unfolding. And I know in the email that you sent when we sent the questions, you know, you mentioned like the multiple pathways and how there are so many different recovery pathways and how it's important to learn about them. I'm a person, my foundation was 12-step, and it was a good 6 years before I was even introduced to the concept of multiple pathways. Like, I thought like my pathway was the only one, like, because that's all I was exposed to. But once exposed to that, like my recovery expanded in allowance, but also like in the mirror. You know, I feel like understanding allows for us to grow and develop in our understanding for those we're surrounded by, but also like in the way that we treat ourselves, you know? And I think the conversation around allyhood and people who have like personally experienced it, like that conversation is a conversation of like continuing to create a safe space where we can have that experience. And I want to lean into so the title of the book is creating a recovery community or recovery friendly community, right? And we've had conversation here in Detroit around what it is to create a recovery friendly community. There's also Ann Arbor, where University of Michigan is at, and a lot of people come around from around the country to come there because of how recovery friendly that community is. There are a lot of restaurants that are like understanding around, 12-step meetings. And if you got to go to extra meetings today, you can shift off, and they have a collegiate recovery program. And it's just like a hand in hand community. Every aspect of the community is in support of the recovery community. And so what are some things that you've seen that define recovery-friendly community? What do that look like, and how do people who seek to be allies contribute to that in their own communities?
Well, so that's a great question. We could talk for a couple hours about that. There's a lot there. A lot of times when we talk about in recovery, we talk about the community and we talk about the recovery community. It's sort of people in recovery and then their family members and maybe a couple friends. Mm-hmm. And that is the community where it all happens. And I really take issue with that, in that everybody who's in recovery has a neighbor, has an employer if they're employed, or has interacted with people who are not part of that recovery community. They don't consider themselves an ally. They're not a family member. They just interact with you. And those are the people, for me, that are the next rung out, if you want to think about it that way, rung out from the recovery community, that we need to reach out to bolster a recovery-friendly community. So let's just take a super simple example, like your hairdresser. If you go to a hairdresser, maybe that wasn't the best example, but anyway, it's the one I came up with. It's like, you don't necessarily need your hairdresser, to be a part of the recovery community, meaning to be in on advocacy issues and multiple pathway. You don't necessarily need that, but what you do need is a person who's informed enough about recovery to be empathetic, to be shampooing your hair. They're not saying nasty things about, those drug users, right? And who knows when, if an issue comes up in the community, that person will stand up and say, you know what? My friend, Liz, is in recovery. I love her dearly. And I don't know a whole lot about this, but I want to support, whatever it is that is happening specifically in the recovery community. And you want employers, okay? You want an employer who's gonna be knowledgeable about addiction and recovery, who's going to be knowledgeable about the resources. They don't necessarily need to go to bat for every recovery community issue, but you need them there, right? And so there's this whole rung of people that aren't in the recovery community per se, but are really, really important to people in recovery. And what I've observed is that as people spend more time in recovery, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, 10 years, right? That part of the community becomes more and more important because that's where they spend their time. So for most people in recovery, the recovery community is really important in the first couple of years. And as they get better and as they decide to do different things with their lives, they move beyond the recovery community. And that's the part of the community then that also has to be friendly, recovery friendly, because people are still living there in recovery. It's just that they're not in those early years and and they're just going bigger, kind of getting bigger with their recovery. Does that make any sense?
No, that's a great explanation. And I think it kind of aligns with some of the work we do here at the Phoenix. Initially, we need community in general. But as somebody with boots on ground, to make sure that there's spaces that so we did in Motor City Recovery Night, is still fresh in my head. So we did this program where we took 250 people to a Pistons game. We had a sober section. And so that's kind of like that on-ramp that, one, allows for the language and the conversation to start being had within this organization of a professional basketball team. And so that they can start thinking about things like, okay, mocktails, sober sections, like you're starting to introduce people to like the conversation and to the things that could help support this aspect of your customer base. And then also for a team member, it's the on-ramp to see like, oh, here goes an environment that I thought I'd never be back in, or that I rarely go to, even though I'm 5-6 years in recovery, just because it's alcohol drenched. And I went and I had a great time. So maybe 2 weeks from now, we go see Disney on Ice in this venue, or we, come to another Pistons game, because like I've seen it, I've tasted it, I've been here, and I came with the safety of, an organization that's backing me and creating the environment, and 249 other people that are on the same path as me. But now this is kind of unlocking like, oh, this is what's possible moving forward. It's that type of work that creates an environment where people are aware that, oh, people are in different walks of life. And so how can we be respectful and inclusive of everybody that will want to participate and have fun in these ways? And so, that's a great way to bust it down. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah. I mean, I think I like that example of, going into an entertainment venue, employers, I'm thinking landlords. I mean, any place where banking institutions, I mean, any place where we all interact, but in this case, people in recovery interact. That's where we need people who are recovery friendly, for sure.
Yeah. I think that's where the storytelling is one of our most powerful tools as far as like the hairdresser goes. I rarely do you go into any kind of salon environment without being offered a glass of wine these days, I've found. And that's fine. I'm not, that's fine. Like I will say no, but I've also learned the power of saying, oh no, I'm sober, I love a water or something like that. And not in and let's talk about it, or like, you have triggered me, or like, how dare you? No, just like, oh no, but also this is my thing. And sometimes that leads into a conversation. I would say 9 out of 10 times that I say something like that in a public space, there is someone who is just like, oh my God, like either I am, or my mom, or my brother, or my so-and-so, like something like that. Or just like, oh, no kidding. That's cool. Like rarely I don't know that I've ever gotten a unkind response. And the few times that it's been an uncomfortable response, the way that's we've moved through that is I'm able to kind of like make light of things maybe that can put folks at ease. And like that's, I think, a power that a lot of us in recovery have, because I found that people who've experienced substance use disorder tend to be incredibly creative and incredibly deep feeling and incredibly empathetic. And that was one of the things we tried to like just make go away for a long time. But now it's a superpower. And to be able to be like, oh yeah, when this happened, like, one of these and I'll be in jail next week, something like that. You can allow it to transition into a part of the story that suddenly this person is not just seeing you as a person that it's like, oh man, what a killjoy. They're saying no to wine and they're talking about the sobriety thing, but like, oh, this is actually somebody I enjoy being around. So maybe this is not such a big, scary thing. And then the next time they have a conversation about it, like they maybe talk about it in a different way. And it's just this like ripple effect that I think every single person in the world has a absolute ability to impact. And these conversations allow people that maybe feel like they're not part of the recovery community to realize that actually they are. Like, because you're in the world and like there's nobody not impacted by this. So like, yes, you are, and welcome. And we're better with you as part of it. And it doesn't have to be you. It doesn't have to be your immediate person. It's you're in it. You're one of us.
And at the very least, like if I'm a dope hairdresser, I'm gonna make sure that I got water for you next time. Like after all that, I'm putting the essential water in the refrigerator for you. I got you. I got you.
They almost always have water, and it always turns out well. And I'm always so grateful for the opportunity to have those conversations. So, and also for folks who are listening who are in recovery or working towards it, or family members, like you have that power, but you don't have that responsibility if you're not ready to be open about it. It's okay to move through the world and just share what feels right and keep the rest for yourself.
I'll say, as a family member, when someone in that hairdresser environment or whatever, where somebody says, no thanks, I don't drink now, or I'm in recovery, whatever phrase people choose to use. For me, as a family member with some family members in recovery, it's an opportunity for me, which I always appreciate, to say, oh, wow, that's so cool, and then I'll say something about my family members. Not much, but it's an opportunity to make a connection that's a happy connection,
Yeah.
right? It's like, oh yeah, I'm happy for you and I'm happy for my family members. So
Yeah.
I'll just say that when that happens to me, I really enjoy that opportunity.
It's a celebration because we don't think of it that way. The world doesn't think of it that way, that it's a celebration, that like, yeah, it was a lot of really hard, scary things. And now it's also the thing that maybe that we can be the most proud of. So to recognize that, like what a kind thing to do for everybody that's there. So that's
for
super
sure.
cool.
So as we get a little closer to closing up, I think the biggest question on my mind is, Alison, if somebody's listening to this podcast right now and are like, I'm surrounded by people going through things that I don't necessarily understand, but I want to figure out how I can get involved. I want to figure out how I can be an advocate. I want to figure out how I could be an ally. I just don't know how to get started. What do you tell that person?
In a purely selfish world, I would tell them to buy my book and read it. But aside from that,
I will second that.
So I sort of kind of grew my recovery chops in the state of Maine, but now I'm in Virginia. And one thing that I have learned is that recovery is just really different in different parts of the country. And I think it's so important for us to acknowledge that, especially because your listeners are, from all different parts of the country.
And beyond.
And so, great. Yeah, cool. Whatever recovery looks like in your area. So in some areas, it's very, strict 12-step. In other areas, it's anything goes. It just looks different in different parts of the country. Find a person, find somebody that's working on these issues, that's in recovery. You can go to a 12-step meeting. People don't know that, for example. You can go to a 12-step meeting if you want to learn more. And I have been to some, and they are so rewarding to be at. So for all of you guys out there who haven't been to one, try it out. You can go to smart recovery meetings. You can go. I don't want to say participate, but you can go and observe and learn in many, many, many different ways. And so that's one thing that I would say.
And just to clarify too, because there's open meetings that everybody's welcome at, and then there's closed meetings that are specifically for people who consider themselves to be whatever it is that the 12-step is. But there are open meetings for all programs that you can come and sit in.
Yeah. Thanks for that. Because yes, I know some of them are closed, but or go to an Al-Anon meeting. I mean, get yourself connected somehow with the recovery community. That's
come to
one
a Phoenix
thing.
Class.
There you go, Phoenix. See, so but find a way to interact. So not just learn online, but to interact, because that's kind of where the magic happens. If you're already interested, I mean, half the magic's already there, right?
Yeah.
In getting connected with some people, it takes, I would say, about 10 seconds in the recovery community to meet somebody else, and then somebody else, and then somebody else. I think that's one of the things that the recovery community does extremely well, is just this really solid network of people. And, if you're specifically interested in, it depends, right? Some allies are pretty nerdy about advocacy and policy change. That's kind of a different beast.
Thank God for them.
And so, we've got recovery advocacy projects in many states, and they're online. There's Faces and Voices Recovery. I mean, there's different organizations that we could talk more about, or I could help, put in your program notes. But I think the best thing to do is to reach out. If you're in a collegiate environment, most universities now have collegiate recovery programs. Find somebody that you can connect with to sort of start you on the path of learning about recovery and learning about what you bring as an ally. And you'll probably be surprised at what you have. You might think in your mind, oh, I can be a so-and-so. But in fact, we all have so many different things to offer as allies to kind of go down that path. So,
yeah. And I think it's important to note, and I know this just from the people in my life who are not in recovery, who have joined things like Phoenix classes and accompanied me to other recovery spaces, that when you are a person who has not experienced substance use disorder and you come to a recovery space, you're not taking up a spot. You're actually making it bigger. Like there's not less room for those of us who need it or something. Like you are expanding it. Now you are just like a go gadget person that's going to help more people out there. So come and know that it's not just because you're, even if it does just satisfy some curiosity, like cool, there's still a lot of really, really good things that are happening there, and it makes a difference. And I can speak for myself. I feel so seen and supported when there is someone who shows up and is scared and doesn't know if they're, if it's okay if they're there, it's so important.
So I've had that experience also. I'm thinking about a yoga class that I went to that was, they did like a mini 12-step, 10 minutes of 12-step before the yoga class. Yeah. And it was mostly people in recovery, but not exclusively. And some of the people in there thanked me for being there. And so I had that experience also of just talk about welcoming. It was awesome.
Go
I know,
gadget
make fun of me. I was waiting for it.
I'm going to remember that one too. That's a good one.
But yeah, thanks, Alison, for coming through and really giving us an inside look on your personal experience with allyship, as well as kind of a starting point to get started if people are looking to get their hands dirty within allyship, within recovery.
You're most welcome. I am thrilled to be here, and I love listening to your podcast. And I actually haven't been to a Phoenix event, but I will. I'll check it out.
Come on. They're on Zoom. Yeah. You don't even have to go anywhere. You don't even leave your house. Yeah.
Well, I did interview a person who's active in Phoenix now for the book, and that was predominantly his pathway, and it was
exciting,
marvelous. Yeah, nice. Marvelous.
That's so great. We will definitely link your book and any other resources in the show notes. But is there anywhere that you want to just shout out that folks can, if they want more of you, which I'm sure they will, where they can start?
Well, thank you. So the best place to go is just my website, which is AlisonJonesWebb.com. So pretty simple.
Awesome. Alison with one L.
One L. Alison. Yeah.
Perfect. Yep. I know we didn't get into your personal, super duper nitty gritty, your personal story, but I still think that I want to ask our question. Bryce, what do you think? Is that cool?
Go ahead, shoot it.
All right. Because I just think everybody has a cool answer, and there's always somebody that needs to hear it. So, Alison, if you were able to get in contact, pick up the magical phone of the past with a former version of yourself back in whatever day you might want to reach out to, what might be a message you would want to send to that person, that version of you? It's a really easy question. It takes no thought at all. Just kidding.
Oh, I know. I guess I would tell myself not to be so afraid to reach out to the people that are around me, because it turns out that I have way more people who care about me than I thought. I'll leave it at that.
I knew it. I knew it was going to be a thing that we needed to hear. Thank you. Super grateful.
Thank you guys. Yeah.
Well, it has been such a pleasure to have you on, and just to dig into this topic, which I think we're going to continue to dig into more and more, because this community is full of everybody, all different experiences within recovery, just being impacted by substance use in this world. So thank you, everybody who's listening. We're so grateful. We don't take it lightly that you take the time to press play week after week. I hope you also press subscribe if you haven't already, so that you don't miss a single episode. We've got some cool things coming out in the next, few weeks and months. So don't miss it, and rate and review if you'd be so kind. This is one, I think I say this often, maybe every time, but please send this to someone, because this is an important conversation. We talk about allies within the recovery spaces that those of us who are really in it are in, but I don't think that's something that people even know what that is. So send it, share it, let folks know. So, and we also would love to hear from you, and Bryce will tell you how you can do that.
Yeah, no, you can get your BlackBerry and text me at my BlackBerry number. Nah, you can hop
on. Is this a go-go gadget? Are you going back to my...
You took it back to Inspector Gadget. I had to bring the BlackBerry out for that.
I knew it.
But no, you can download the Phoenix app, and then once you get on the Phoenix app, there is different groups for different interests. And one of those groups is the Rise, Recover, Live podcast group. Come in here, holla at Liz and I. Come holla at our guests. Come tell us what it is that you're really appreciating about the show. Come tell us what it is that you would like for us to do less of, like 80s cartoons drops. Do we need more of those or less of those?
Not we need more.
Or drop a loving note in there, because I've been reading some things in there, man. I saw something in there the other day that almost made me cry, just to see how everybody is really resonating with the content of this podcast. So that's a way to get to us directly. Download the Phoenix app, jump in the Rise, Recover, Live podcast group, and come talk to us.
Yeah. All right. Well, we did it. Another really, really fun way to start the week. We're always like, man, we record on a Monday, and every single time it's always worth it. It always makes the day a million times better. So thanks both of you. Thanks everybody. And we'll see you next time.
Catch you next go.
So now you're excited. Bryce, Liz, how do I get involved with the Phoenix? Well, my friend, it is super simple. We actually have an app. Head over to the Google Play Store or the Apple App Store, or look in the show notes of this podcast, wherever you're listening to or watching this podcast, and go download the Phoenix app.
The Phoenix app makes it so easy to find classes that are near you, or to access our virtual class schedule where you can hop on from the comfort of your home. You can also join our groups and have a conversation with someone from the Phoenix community from anywhere in the world. Please make sure that you join the podcast group where you can connect with Bryce and I and other listeners. Everything that you need is in the show notes. You can also head to our website at www.thephoenix.org. And maybe while you're there, you click the volunteer tab and get even more involved.